So hello, everyone. Welcome to 2023 RM Karma Doctoral Students and Junior Faculty Consortium. My name is Hoda Vaziri, and I'm the chair of the consortium this year. We have a great lineup presenters today and throughout the program, and I'm very excited to be here. So I wanted to first give you an agenda for today. So we'll do first, Dr. Chris Byron would do an introduction to the RM consortium. Then we'll have Dr. Larry Williams to give us an introduction about karma, and then I'll talk a little bit about the consortium, introduce the panelists, and then we'll go from there. And then at the end, we'll do our Q&A. We have first Dr. Chris Byron. She is the chair of RM division, and she wanted to welcome you and tell you a little bit about the division. Okay. Can you see that?
Yes, thank you. So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Before I get started, I wanted to first just say thank you to the people who were so instrumental to making this consortium happen. Of course, Hoda, who is your fearless leader. And then you'll also later be meeting Eric Gonzalez-Mule, who is the track chair for the micro side of the program. And then Tim Hubbard, who is the track chair for the macro side of the program. And then, of course, Larry Williams, who for years I made almost no impression on, because every time I would meet him, he would claim that we had never met. And so now this is a running joke between us, because finally I've been able to make an impression on him, and he does, I believe, remember me. So anyhow.
Yes, Chris, I do. It's good to see you.
That's fantastic. So Hoda, do you mind advancing to the next slide? So first, I wanted to start off by telling you what the Research Methods Division means to me. I got involved with the Research Methods Division very early on because my advisor told me that this was a great division to be a member of, and I followed his advice, and I'm really happy that I did. When I joined the Academy, I think probably like a lot of people, I found it extremely overwhelming. I was certain that people were looking at me and wondering why I was such a loser and I didn't have any friends and didn't know very many people. And getting involved with the Research Methods Division was really a community of scholars and a group of people who I felt like I could really be a part of. I found that the division was extremely welcoming. Hoda, do you mind advancing for me, please? I became involved with the Research Methods Division when I was an assistant professor, and I first became a treasurer. I later became a representative at large. I've been involved with the doctoral consortium for a number of years, and now I am the chair of the division, and also had all of the other roles that go along with that. So it's even though I'm not a methodologist, I found that I learned so much by being a part of the division. I'll tell you a little bit about some of the member benefits, because it's really through those member benefits that you gain so much from being a member of the Research Methods Division. Hoda, do you mind, please? So the Research Methods Division is, kind of what you would expect. We are the division of the Academy that's really all about methods. And that means that we're a division for everyone, because everyone in the Academy of Management uses research methods. And our goal is to be extremely inclusive. So that means that we are concerned with methods that, more micro scholars use, those methods that more macro scholars use. We're interested in both quantitative and qualitative methods, and, really just the gamut of all of the different kinds of research methods. If it's a method we're interested in, and we want to make sure that we can help you to use whatever methods would be the most appropriate for the research that you do. So if you are a person in the Academy of Management, then I highly recommend that you join the Research Methods Division and you continue to be a member of the Research Methods Division, because it is certainly a division for you. Hoda, you mind? So let me just tell you a little bit about some of the member benefits for people who join our division. So one of them that I have over the years found to be extremely useful is RMNet. So RMNet is a listserv, and it's a place where Research Methods Division members can post questions. And what you'll find is that then when you post a question, people then post answers to your question. What it is this community of scholars and also lurkers like me who don't answer questions, but just listen to, watch the questions, post questions, and then look at those answers. I have found that I've learned so much over the years because of just being on RMNet and seeing those questions and answers that get posted. I don't know what happened to the slides. Okay, perfect. So RMNet, it's a fabulous place to either get your questions answered or just learn by reading the questions and answers that people post. It's also, there's a searchable archive, so you can also search that archive to see what questions people have asked in the past, and then see what how people have answered those questions. The Organizational Research Methods Journal is also affiliated with the Research Methods Division. And when you are a member of the Research Methods Division, you have discounts for both journal subscriptions, but also discounts on purchasing other SAGE publications. We, of course, as you might know, we have an extremely robust and very helpful set of PDWs that are offered each year at the Academy. Those are, of course, open to any AOM member who participates in the conference. We also have, of course, papers and symposium that are offered during the scholarly program. But these are both great places to learn more about the latest methodological innovations and also learn more about how you should use methods in the most appropriate way. And then, of course, this consortium is an incredible resource to all of our members. And even when you are not a doctoral student anymore, you can still continue to participate, because we do welcome, anybody to participate, anybody who's a member, to participate in this doctoral consortium. And then, of course, Karma, which is led by our fearless leader, Larry Williams. Karma offers both in-person and online, both synchronous and asynchronous seminars on research methods. They also have video libraries and all kinds of resources. So Karma is definitely a member benefit. They're an organization that is also one of our affiliated organizations. And then finally, we have a website that's just going to get better and better that has resources for you. So for example, we are restarting what was called the Measures Chest. I think is now going to be called a Measures, Compendium. I'm not sure exactly what they're going to be calling it, but it's a basic resource where you can go if you're looking for a measure. It'll point you to possible measures that you might use. Hoda, do you mind, please? Yes, so lastly, in addition to, participating in all of the benefits that the division offers, I do want to let you know about some ways in which you could get involved. And this is really important to us in this division. We are very eager to expand the number of people who are involved in our division. So one key thing that I want to point out is that right now we have an open position for a social media coordinator. We would love someone to step up and be that person to help us make sure that whatever we do in the division, that the word gets spread far and wide. So if you think that this is a good fit for your skill set, I would love for you to reach out to me and let me know that you're interested, and I can let you know how to apply for that position. Another thing is that more generally, we are seeking to expand volunteer involvement. We just created a volunteer committee, and we would love to have more people become a part of the Research Methods Division and get involved in the things that we do and help to make our division even better. If you might be interested in volunteering with the division, it's, you won't be committed. If you just want to let me know that you might be interested, send me an email and I'll make a note of it. I'll send it on to the volunteer committee and let them know that when there are volunteer opportunities, that you're someone that might be interested. We would love for you to volunteer with our division. I also want to urge you to attend our business meeting and our reception. We have a fantastic reception at the Academy of Management. It's a lot of fun. It is not one of these receptions where it's just, completely packed and totally overwhelming. It is a well-attended, but not overly crowded reception where we always have fantastic food and drink, and we would love for you to come and to meet people. And so please come by our reception in Boston. And if you see me, please come up and say hi and let me know that you participated in this session. And I would love to get you to bring you in to the division and get you involved. As I mentioned, also, I really want to make sure that you know and look for the PDWs and other sessions that we offer at the Academy of Management. This is another great way of expanding your learning in addition to this consortium. So please look at the Academy program and make sure to participate in any of the PDWs and other sessions that we offer. And I would also like to say that next year, when it is time in January, when it's time to submit workshops and papers to the Academy of Management, I hope that you will consider submitting your work to our division, because we always need excellent submissions. And then finally, I want to point out to you how important it is to me and to so many of the other leaders in this division that we make sure that Research Methods Division is a division for anyone who does research methods. So what that means is that we are very eager to expand the number of volunteers and leaders who tend to do qualitative research, or, for example, who tend to do more meso or macro level research, because we know that that those are ways in which we need to expand our community. Hoda? So yeah, with that, I just want to thank you again for participating and for being a part. And I really hope that I see you in Boston. And thank you so much for being a part of this.
Thank you very much, Chris. So I've received a few questions about how to actually access RMNet. I believe that information is already on our website, right, Chris?
That's correct. Yes, we have improved our website to make sure that information about how to join RMNet is a little bit more obvious than it used to be. So there are directions there. And if you have trouble finding that information, just please feel free to email me. I'm happy to point you in the right place.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Chris. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So next, we have Dr. Larry Williams, who is the director of CARMA. CARMA is tightly connected with Research Method Division and has always been a major supporter of our division. Larry, would you like to say a few words?
Yeah. Hey, greetings, everybody. And first of all, I want to let you know that in 1984, I was at the group meeting that led to the establishment of the Research Methods Interest Group, and became a division shortly thereafter, and it has been my home since then. And it was a great home and source of support, knowledge, friendship, mentoring, all of that. So I strongly encourage you to join and become involved with the Research Methods Division. It is for everybody, not just the quote methodologist. And so from the point of view of CARMA, it's a pleasure to be offering the support again for this event as part of several things that we do in collaboration with the Research Methods Division. CARMA, you may know, is an academic center at Texas Tech University. I founded it 25 years ago. And we have, our mission is for faculty and doctoral students providing research methods resources. We have an institutional membership model. This year we had over close to 200 universities worldwide that were members. We also have a very active short course program. And so I invite you to visit the CARMA website to get more information about that. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Hoda. And again, thank you. Michael, nice to see you again. Chris, of course, to see you. Insuo, we're grateful for everybody. As a benefactor of this event, I'm grateful for everybody from the Research Methods Division that helps make it happen. So thank you. Enjoy.
Well, thank you for all your help and support for this program. Just to give you an introduction about the consortium. So we have, as you know, we have 4 sessions over 4 weeks virtually. We have over 200 registered participants across 32 countries. And we have about 75 non-RM members who we kindly asked to join because this actually impacts our ability to provide PDWs and sessions at AOM. The consortium committee, well, me, I'm the chair, and then I had Tim, as Chris said, Tim Hubbard and Eric Gonzalez as track chairs, who had tremendously helped me in organizing this amazing lineup of panelists and presenters. So thank you to both of them. Tim is traveling, so he wasn't able to be with us, but Eric will be actually joining us soon. So these are the 4 sessions that we will be having. Today's session is on designing and managing your dissertation or large research project. The next 3 sessions will be covering data collection, data analysis, and then managing the review process. And we have a great, amazing panelists that will be sharing their expertise with us. So today's topic is designing and managing your large research project or dissertation. And we have 3 amazing presenters who will be sharing their perspective on the topic with us. So thank you, all of you, for your willingness to share your expertise with us today. First, we have Michelle Anteby, who is a professor of management and organization at Boston University. His research interests focuses on how individuals relate to their work, their occupation, and the organization they belong to. And he mainly focuses on qualitative research for method for his research. Next, we have Insuo, who is a professor of human resource management at Temple University. And his research includes personal selection, strategic human resource management, and human capital resources. Unfortunately, Itai Stern was really looking forward to come today, but there was a last minute emergency and he won't be able to share his perspective with us. So what we'll do today is just have each of our presenters share 15-20 minutes of their initial thoughts on the process, and then the majority of our time today will be spent on Q&A. Again, thank you both of you for being here. Michelle, do you want to start?
Hi, everyone. Hi, Oda. I'll try to share my screen first, if that's okay.
Yes, let me stop share. So,
okay.
Okay, you should be able to share.
I'll go for it. Okay. Do you see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, and is it on screen share?
It's not the presentation. Okay. Well, now it's good.
Great. Okay, well, hello everyone. Thank you, Hoda, Chris, and Larry for the invitation. And I'm really looking forward to our discussion today. If there are any questions, I guess we'll be using the chat. If I don't monitor it, maybe Hoda, let me know if you see anything come by, and I'll try to do my best to address it as we move forward with this. So my name is Michel Anteby, and I didn't come from kind of a qualitative powerhouse. So I did my PhD at NYU Stern. I had, very good advice and advisors, but had to figure out kind of what's a qualitative research project. And therefore, I'll try to speak about, my perspective and what I learned. Also, I came to the US from France, where honestly, no one second guessed qualitative research in a way. So it was also a discovery for me to have to justify, explain, and clarify as much as I do today my methods. But that's what I'll talk about and hopefully answer some questions around as well. I also love that the real title of this segment was Designing and Managing a Qualitative Dissertation or Large Research Projects. In qualitative research, any project becomes large very fast, right? So I do not know of any small qualitative projects because you start interviewing, maybe doing a bit of archives, observations, and before you know it, you're completely sucked into your field work and don't know what to do and are completely overwhelmed, at least in my experience, by what can be done, seen. So it's more idea of carving out something than trying to figure out what you should be narrowly doing. As I was thinking about this session, I tried to imagine the 5 main kind of questions that colleagues usually send my way, or that students invariably come up with at some point, and hopefully earlier than later, to try to kind of grapple with what might this design look like. So some of the pain points or challenges, if you wish, that I see in qualitative research designs are people asking me what topic to pick, right? So this is a candy store. You could pick anything. There's a immensity of topics, endless picks. My sense is when I'm asked that question is that people are trying to surf the wave and try to get on the trendy topic that might land them a job or get them the publication. But at least that's kind of my coding of the hopes. I might be wrong. Another pain point usually is full access. Scholars want to have enough access to data so they can say something, because the assumption is that if you get full access, and that means, a sign off from the field, maybe repeat interviews over time, maybe the dump of the entire archive of an organization, you will get full insights. I'll try to explain why this is not always the case. Third point is around sufficient data. Here, the hope is that you actually will be able to nail whatever you want to do if you really have enough data. But the key question is enough. What is sufficient data? And I'll try to give you a few examples around that. Fourth, coding mastery. Reviewers, editors, advisors, colleagues will often come to you and ask about supplementary coding, explanations of your process. Here, sometimes the hope is that if you're really good at coding, insights will emerge. I almost want to say auto-emerge, because if you have a good process and solid process, you should get something at the back end. Again, warnings here, this is not always what happens. And finally, the dreaded contribution. When a reviewer says, not sure I see the contribution in your paper or your dissertation. The hope is that we all derive new theories from what we do. And again, I do not want to lower the bar. I think that's the big hope, but there might be intermediary hopes that we can run with. So I'll say a few words about these. Sounds good? Okay. And again, I'm not monitoring the chat, so Hoda, if you see anything and if there are interruptions, just feel free to step in and let me know. So picking a topic, let's work backwards. When something goes to print, probably you started working on it if you're qualitative researchers, let's say optimistically, 4 or 5 years before it goes to print, right? So it's really hard to predict what will be the hot topic 5 years from now. And because it's so hard to predict, I would argue that you shouldn't be in the fortune-telling business. You should just pick a topic that you think you'll be able to run with for enough years that will engage you. And once you're in that setting, I trust that you will find something. I'll give you some examples. For instance, when Uber and Lyft started appearing all over the US, I rapidly tried to do a brief lit review to understand what was there. Of course, it was interesting, but who knew what would become of it? And importantly, we were all also looking at that. So there's a double risk. One, you cannot fortune tell, but also if you are fortune telling, trust me, there are 100 other people behind you who are probably doing it. And therefore, my strategy has always been to pick a topic where I am uniquely positioned. I know something that others don't, and maybe others might not have the same access as I do. For instance, what you're seeing here is a representation of a human cadaver. In 2008, a friend of mine was interning as a resident in a hospital in New York. And I went to pick him up at one point and noticed that besides his lab, there was a door where you couldn't enter. That was the anatomy lab of the hospital. I had no idea if this was a trendy topic or not. I just knew that probably because the door was locked, it was hard to access. And if I could access it, there might be something there of interest. So again, picking a topic, very unclear, but I would encourage you to run with what you can uniquely do, where you are, and how engaging it will be for you over the years. I'll move on to the second myth, if you wish. Full access. If we step back a few seconds, remember the door of the anatomy lab was locked. Trust me, it took me maybe 2 years to unlock that door. But there are huge benefits in resistance. So even if you don't have full access, every pushback you get from the field is actually indicative of what might be behind that door. Let me just illustrate with another project that I worked on with Nick Oquito. So this was a project on ghostwriters. And we were intrigued because ghostwriting is kind of an odd profession, right? We also had a really hard time speaking to any ghostwriter. However, after a few months talking to editors and publishers in New York, we realized that these publishers were often hiring book doctors to help write books, and that these people might be able to help us. So if you look at Ben Carson's Gifted Hands book, in small print, very small, I agree, you see Cecile Murphy. Cecile Murphy is the co-writer on this book. And what publishers hinted to is that maybe these co-writers would be good people for us to talk about ghostwriting. By the way, we had no idea why they were telling us that. But very quickly, we constructed a database of people who had co-written books and whose names were on the cover, like Cecile Murphy. And after talking to a few, discovered that for the right price, they were willing to drop their names from the cover, right? So imagine a ghostwriter who's telling you, I'm willing to co-write with you, Ben Carson, a book. If you pay me, I don't know, $75,000, I want my name on the cover in small print. But if you're willing to pay me $150,000, you'll be alone on the cover. So all this resistance to us talking to them was actually part of the field work and was indicative of the dynamics of people in the setting. And again, full access might be a hope, but actually you don't need full access. You need good access, and you also need to track pushback, code for resistance, and better understand why you are not getting the access you need. I'll move on to the third point, sufficient data. So this is like, the dreaded question, like, how much interview data do I need? How many people do I have to hang out with? How many hours in the field, etc. My quick answer to that question is usually that it depends on how many cells you have in your analysis and what's your unit of analysis. I will add, if this is not obvious, that yes, qualitative researchers can count, and we are not quantitative scholars, but we can do basic counts. I'll just give you an example. So this is from the same project on the commerce of cadavers that I had highlighted up front. Focusing on the unit of analysis is really important because even if you have like 40 interviews, maybe the 40 clinical anatomists you spoke to actually mentioned 70 or 80 human cadavers that they needed to acquire in order to teach dissection in their hospitals. So quickly, your unit of analysis has moved from number of interviews to number of cadavers. I see there's a request for closed captions. If someone knows how to do this, please go for it. Okay, I will try to do this and hope it works. So the unit of analysis is important because you're not tracking number of interviewees, but actually number of instances of the phenomena of interest. In my case, it was trades and cadavers, but in your case, it could be, slippages at work in terms of gender pronouns, or it could be identity contradictions or anything you have. Moreover, when you're starting to kind of focus on your unit of analysis, it's really interesting to have variation. So even though we're doing qualitative inductive work often, we really want to have variation across our units of analysis. And here we were trying to distinguish academic house programs from independent ventures. I'm sorry. The academic house programs were ones that were in hospitals, and the independent ventures were outside of hospitals. So we were trying to track how many cadavers went through each program and to create variation in our data. I hope this gives you a feel for the unit of the analysis and variation. And I apologize for the closed captions. Apparently it's not strong enough. If anybody can correct this, feel free to step in. I will move on to the fourth and second to last kind of advice about qualitative dissertations. By the way, this will also be a good test of volume because I want to make you listen to something. There's this belief often that if you code, your data as much as possible, something will emerge. So if you go from your 180 codes to your 60 codes, to your 20 codes, to your 10 codes, you will find a solution. This might work in some instances, but most of the scholars I know who do qualitative research do not build insights by doing this. Instead, they're very careful to note what's odd in their field, what might be kind of a puzzle or paradox, something they want to explore. This is of utmost importance, especially upfront, because very quickly you become insensitive to anything you notice in your field. I will play a small snippet of an audio and we'll see if closed captions work. This was a project with Audrey Holm, who's now at HEC, on puppeteers move from the East Coast to the West Coast. Why is this important? Because the West Coast had puppetry jobs that were on TV and film. So a very different kind of setup and audience than traditional puppetry. What I'll show you here or play here is a snippet from a performance in a theater that's a traditional one. I think it's the Bob Barker Theater. And I don't know why I recorded this, but I was attending one of their performances and thought this would be important for us later. So let me just play it and I hope you'll hear it.
Very close time.
Okay, I hope this was loud enough and that you all heard. But basically, I captured this because as I was entering the theater and attending the performance, there was really something odd about the energy of the audience that I captured in this audio. And our entire coding months after this kind of focused on whether an audience was present or not. In movie and film, you don't have an audience. So the expertise you have to develop is very different from the one you can develop in a performing hall. And that key dimension was really very instrumental to our theoretical developments and the way we framed our paper. So maybe we would have ended up here if we had coded, endlessly our data, but more often than not, you kind of find nuggets and intuitions in your gut reactions, puzzles, paradoxes, and then you will go to the data to code a bit more in depth for it. I will share the last kind of nugget before wrapping up and opening it up for questions. We all hope for the big theoretical bang, right? But no one knows what the bang will be. And even if you have a big bang, it will probably take decades to register as a big theory that others will use. So the hope here is not the big theory, but really a small move in the literature. Qualitative research is good, I think, at allowing you to kind of unpack odd puzzles and kind of make slight moves that hopefully will become great theories later on. When you're doing it, you have no idea what's happening. You just feel that there's like a very different insight that past literature has not spoken about. The example I'll give here is a project I did with Nishani Bourmeau at Neoma in France. And it's a project on anesthesiologists, again in hospitals, yes, using hypnosis. For a US or international audience, this might be very odd, but actually in France, 10% of the anesthesiologists have been trained to use hypnosis. In their traditional role, and this is what you see on the left of your screen, anesthesiologists kind of monitor patient vitals. They dose drugs. They go in a room, they dose, they maybe run to another room. So they're very distant with the patients. When they use hypnosis, and I probably should clarify, so hypnosis is simply to dissociate the patient from the actual situation they're in. Usually it entails trying to bring you to a place that's very quiet and relaxing for you. So in a pre-ops consultation, they'll ask you about what you like, maybe walking in a forest or a holiday that you enjoyed. They'll try to get to have the patients tell them about what they saw, what they smelled, what they felt. And when they're in the operating room with them, they work with the patient to try to recreate those sensations and therefore kind of buffer them from what's happening in the room. It's surprisingly effective, not only in small kind of surgical operations, but also in addition to drug use. For instance, we saw patients who underwent a C-section with a combination of hypnosis and low drug dosage. What's interesting to us in this example, and an example of small moves, is that the literature on professions always talks about socializations with peers. So this is what we're doing actually today, right? Us as scholars and academics, we will turn to each other to learn, to gain recognition, validation, to understand what we should do. In this case, the anesthesiologists were turning to patients, and that's extremely odd. So our entire framing was about how, in order to reboot your professional work, in this instance, to add hypnosis, which went completely opposite to what they had been trained in as a scientist, because hypnosis is almost magical. So when they were trying to reboot their profession, they actually relied on patients not peers. And that move, that reliance on patients, is completely counterintuitive in the profession's literature and allowed us to kind of unpack these dynamics. I'm happy to give many more examples of this, but to follow Hoda's kind of lead, I'll just wrap up and then open it up. Pain points were picking a topic, full access, sufficient data, coding mastery, hoping for contributions. And I think the reality of this is, don't try to fortune tell, just pick something you really enjoy and that you can work with for many years. Ideally, something that you might have unique knowledge or tentative access to, but not full access. Pay attention to the resistance you get each time you do this. When you're looking for data, think of variation within sample and maybe shifting units of analysis. Take early notes of your surprises and puzzles and aim for small moves if you can. So with that said, I will stop there. Thank you for your attention, and I'll pass it on or take questions depending on what Hoda wants us to do. Okay,
Thank you
thanks.
so much. I appreciate it. I think we'll put the Q&A for the end so we can, have like a discussion as well. So thank you so much. I'm also working on the background to see if I can actually enable the closed captioning. So this is a slightly different than the regular Zoom that I'm familiar with. So it doesn't have that option. So I'm trying. So please be patient with me. Insu, do you want to start?
Oh, yes, I can start now.
Thank
I'm
you so
here
much.
my slide. Yes. So now you can see my slide, right?
Yes.
Let's see. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Inso. I'm a professor at Temple University, and I'm also serving as an associate editor for Journal of Applied Psychology. So today I'm going to talk about my tips, the tips I have learned over the years regarding how to design and managing your quantitative dissertation or research project. Like Michelle mentioned, I believe that there's no small project. So I guess I just dropped the large before a research project. So I'm going to focus on 10 things, 10 tips actually I have learned over the years regarding how to navigate this research project. And I organized my tips based upon the typical structure of research paper. So without further ado, I'm going to talk about the first two tips relate to how you're going to organize the introduction section of any research paper or any dissertation. The first one is first does not necessarily mean most important. So as a novice scholar or doctoral students or even junior scholar, even sometimes it's applicable to a senior scholar, you may want to say in your paper that this is the first study to systematically examine some relationships, like a relationship between X and Y, or you may want to say no research has yet examined this relationship, right? I'm actually attempt to say this many times because I know that this is really the first study to examine that relationship. But at the same time, we got to understand reviewers or dissertation committee's perspective. They don't want to see this open in your dissertation or in your research paper. What they want to see is that the importance of your research question rather than the question has been examined first in your first time in your dissertation. So I'm sure some of you guys already heard about this, but I'm gonna just repeat this. Not all unexamined or under-examined relationships are deserving of empirical investigations or warrant publication. So some of my friends actually has been using this example. Think about this, I think, the relationship between shoe size or your blood type and the performance. Yeah, no one has examined these relationships, right? You know that. But these relationships are really important to examine. That's actually another question. So when you motivate your study, you need to make a strong case that your study is important to address some important issues in our scholarly conversation, or some issues in our related practice. So what you're gonna do is that try to discuss what your study adds to what we already know about the study topic or the relevant literature. So you need to focus on the unique contribution of your study above and beyond relevant previous research findings. So my suggestion for the first one, I think you can say your study is the first study, but at the same time, you got to explain that why the study is important rather than just saying that this is the first study. So that's the point. And then second advice or second tip I have is that silence is not always golden, but open a bomb in research papers. So I found that especially some junior scholars or even doctoral students, when they are talking about the importance of their paper, they feel like they got to be a bit humble. So they are not really bragging about the importance of their study or the contribution of the study in an explicit way. But that's a mistake. Don't assume that leaders or reviewers know your study's contribution without explicit and clear statements about them. So I think, in your dissertation or in any research project, or especially in the introduction section, you got to actually provide a very convincing and compelling statements or explanations about the importance of your study above and beyond previous research findings on a similar topic. This is something really important. So it's not really bragging, but I think that this is something you do to help reviewers and readers understand the importance of your study. But these are 2 points I want to emphasize when you are organizing the introduction section of your paper or dissertation. And by the way, I believe that dissertation is also a research project. So I think, all these tips I'm going to provide today are applicable to doctoral students and junior scholars, even some senior scholars, because sometimes we forget about these important things we have learned. So the next slide I'm going to show you. These 2 tips are related. I have another tip in the next slide. So I have 3 tips related to how to organize the theoretical development or hypothesis development section of your research paper. So the third one is more is not always better than less in terms of theorizing. So what I mean by that, in any research paper or dissertation, you may want to write like this, according to some theory, like X theory, or Y theory further explains, and and then you may want to say that these actually theoretical explanations are consistent with some other theories, like a theory Z. So you want to use multiple theories to justify or to help to advance your research hypothesis. But you should not throw the theoretical kitchen sink. That means you should not draw on too many tangentially relevant theoretical perspectives. Why? Because it only shows that or reveals that your theorizing lacks precision. That's why you have to rely upon many tangentially relevant theoretical perspectives. If you have one good theory, then you got to use that, and that will be compelling enough. So my advice or tip for you guys is that select and focus on fewer theories and develop each theory in more depth, rather than try to be broad and try to invoke a lot of theoretical explanations, because as I said, it only actually reveals that your theorizing lacks precision. And also, I think this is somehow related to this kind of discussion. There is a trade-off between breadth and depth. But in terms of theorizing, depth always outperforms breadth. So I think I'd go for depth rather than breadth in terms of theorizing. And another thing I want to say is that try to integrate theories rather than combine them. So some of you guys may wonder what I mean by that. It's a difference between integration and combination. So integration means that you got to really, I think, intertwine those theoretical perspectives and make their theoretical explanations complete. right? It's like like a real integration, but combining means that you use multiple theories without any integration. For example, you have a research model, which includes multiple relationships, and you have two theories. If you just combine those two theories, then you're going to use one theory to explain some of those relationships. And then you're going to use the other theory to explain the other relationships which cannot be explained by the first theory. So there's no real integration between these two theories, even if you use two of them. So I think many times reviewers and readers want to see theoretical integration rather than just theoretical kind of combination. So I think that this is something I would recommend you guys to keep in mind while you are working on your dissertation or research project. And also, I'm sure like many of you guys heard about this tip, but you should use and develop overarching theoretical framework to guide and justify your variable. Especially what I want to emphasize that why we have to use overarching theoretical framework. I think by using that framework, you can justify your study variable, especially some important study variables such as moderators or mediators. For example, many of you guys, you will say that, yeah, we believe that this variable G will moderate or sometimes mediate the relationship between X and Y in an important way because you believe that way. But what reviewers and readers want to see is that why G, G, not other variables, should be a moderator of interest. Because oftentimes, I think my experience as an associate editor of a journal is that, their argument for their moderator and mediator has no problem. I can completely understand. I can follow their logic. But reviewers often say that why this moderator or this mediator, not other moderators or not other mediators. Their point is that it seems that we can replace your moderator with other moderators using the same logic you used, right? So I think, what you need to do is that you need to really convince that this variable, this moderator, or this, mediator has been chosen by, theoretical framework rather than just by my own like a preference. So that way, I think you can make a very compelling case that this moderator or this mediator or any variable of interest is important and the variable choice can be better justified. And then, as I said, I have one more tip related to how you're going to organize theoretical and hypothesis development section in your paper. So, it happens, more often among doctoral students who do not have a lot of research experience. When they are learning about the literature and when they read, articles, they want to use that knowledge, right? So they want to say something like this. Yeah, some scholars found a positive relationship between X and Y, let's say job satisfaction and job performance. And this relationship and this finding was also confirmed in other researcher studies. And you may want to list that. You may want to list them because you read those articles. And based upon these previous findings, you say, yeah, because of these previous findings, we expect that job satisfaction and job performance will be positively related to in this study. So this is so-called argumentation by citation, because you just build your hypothesis based upon past findings. But this is not theorization because there is no explanation that why these two variables, X and Y, should be positively related to each other. So listing references isn't the same as explaining it. It only shows that, yeah, you know some about the literature. So in theorizing, you need to answer this question. What is the theory that makes you think job satisfaction and job performance should be positively related? So you got to come up with theoretical explanations rather than just listing up all the relevant studies that support your hypothesis. And now I have a few more tips for you guys. And this is related to the method section of your paper. So I found that this issue many times in many papers. So this is so-called disconnect or mismatch issues. So for example, in your theorization, you use A, but in your measurement, you use B. So for example, like your theorization is related to engagement and involvement, let's say. But when I look at the method section, I'm going to find that you actually operationalize engagement or involvement using organizational commitment. But obviously, engagement is not in a commitment, even though they relate to each other. Or like, in your literature review and in your theorization, you focus on a very broad concept of OCB. But I found that in the method section, you actually only measured OCBI, which is interpersonal helping. So there's a disconnect between your theorization and literature review and what you actually examined and measured in your study. And also another issue is that in OBHR or in other research areas, obviously we have more findings at the individual level. So your literature review and your theorization is based upon individual level findings and individual level theories. But later I found that you actually examined, unit level relationships. So this is also another important, I think, problem you should avoid because it's obvious mismatch in terms of level of analysis. So try to, I think, make your paper consistent across all sections, from literature review to the hypothesis development section to the method and research sections and even discussion sections. So I think this is something I want, I want you guys to keep in mind. And the tip 7 is that if you heavily rely upon some specific theoretical mechanism to explain the relationship between certain variables, like variables, job satisfaction and job performance, then the corresponding process or mediating variables should be directly tested and measured. So for example, like when you explain the relationship between job satisfaction and job performance, you may want to say that if people are satisfied with their job or their job conditions such as their supervisors and coworkers and HR systems and something like that, then they will be experiencing positive emotions, and those positive emotions will lead to more frequent engagement of OCBI, right? But your hypothesis about job satisfaction and job performance. So, reviewers obviously want to see that why, the role of positive emotions, and they're going to ask why you did not measure positive emotions as a mediator for this relationship. So I think sometimes it's not easy, right? So, but I guess if you really heavily rely upon some specific theoretical mechanisms, such as positive emotions in this case, you got to really consider measuring them rather than just using that as a theoretical explanation. And then another thing, I'm sure like you heard a lot about this, but you also need to rule out any alternative explanations such as reverse causality and endogeneity in many cases, using appropriate data and using also proper controls. And also, if it's possible, if you have more resources, then you may want to triangulate your research findings with multiple methods, such as experimentation and survey, or like, mixed methods, quantitative and qualitative, or vice versa. That way, I think, you can better rule out any alternative explanations. And then in terms of research and discussion sections, I don't have many tips, but you need to understand that research sections deal with facts. So you got to carefully and accurately describe your research findings, whether your findings are supporting your hypothesis or not, right? Don't, I think, try to be too liberal in describing your research findings. Sometimes people want to say, yeah, these findings are, specific, like findings are partially supported in this study. Then I think it's very fuzzy, right? So you got to be more accurate using some specific numbers and and confidence intervals or sometimes p-values. But whereas the discussion section still deals with points of view, so you need to provide your interpretations rather than repeating what you wrote in the research section. So although the discussion section should be tied with result, the discussion section should not repeat the result section. So oftentimes I found that many researchers, they just repeat, what they wrote in the result section in the discussion section. That way, they feel that it's consistent. But actually, these two sections, result and discussion sections, have different purposes. So you got to understand that. And also in the discussion section, we actually usually, I think, talked about study limitations and future research directions, right? But sometimes you may want to hide your methodological issues or some study limitations that are quite obvious to reviewers and readers, because you just don't want to mention that, right? But it's not a good idea, because reviewers and readers are not dumbs, right? So it's better to disclose that and discuss that. But at the same time, it's an important thing you got to keep in mind. Mentioning limitations do not make them disappear. So if you know study limitations in your study in advance, before you design or before you collect your data, then you got to address that in advance, right? Rather than, I'm going to mention those limitations in the discussion section later on. So I found that this is a very useful advice. And then I have two more tips or advice for you, two pieces of advice for you guys. So many of you guys are early on in your career. So maybe this sounds a bit strange, but I think, if it's possible, start to build a thematic, very thematic and programmatic research portfolio early on. How you can do that? I think tip for you guys is that read widely and research narrowly. So some people they said, I want to build my research program early on. So I'm going to just focus on this one or two topics. So they just read articles relate those two topics heavily. So they must have a lot of knowledge about those two topics, but at the same time, they don't know how to connect those two topics to other important topics, because they read too narrowly. So I think in terms of reading, you got to read widely. But then when you do actual research, you got to do it narrowly. That's the way. But some people they do this in the opposite way. They read narrowly and they also do research very narrowly. That doesn't help, because research should have wide implications whenever possible. That's actually a bigger contribution. And also do not forget when you made love this field. So when you get a rejection from a journal, you're gonna say, "Oh, this damn field, this damn reviewer." You want to put the blame on the journal or reviewers and the action editors. Yeah, I did that, but at the same time, you got to understand why you decide to be in this field. Yeah, even if this rejection, I think I'm gonna keep working on this topic. You got to have that kind of passion, and also review processes are not perfect. There's nothing perfect under the sun, or nothing new under the sun. So I think you got to understand that they are also human beings. So luckily we have more than one top tier journal in each field. So if you don't get that accepted in one top tier journal, then you're gonna try another top tier journal. At least you got some useful suggestions and recommendations from the review process from the first journal. So I think you got to be more optimistic rather than pessimistic about this field. And also for junior scholars, don't forget what made you love this field even after you get tenure. Because some people, after they get tenure, I now have tenure, so I'm gonna slow down, or I'm not going to spend a lot of time on research. Yeah, I think you can do it because you have tenure, but at the same time, think about the thing I think made you love this field. If you have that passion, then you're gonna keep working on research project. And you're gonna do it like, more like as fun rather than work. So my last piece of advice for you guys that when it comes to research project, don't make it work, but fun. Research should be fun, not just work, even though it's work, for most of us, but when you do it, I think, you need to make it fun. That way, I think you can endure, overcome all these issues I mentioned, and you can be successful. So I'm working at Temple University. Our university's slogan is perseverance conquers. So when it comes to research project, I believe the key to success is persistence and perseverance. So you got to be persistent, and then I think the perseverance will conquer, and you will be a more successful scholar. So that's all for my presentation. So I'm looking forward to answer any questions you guys have about my presentation and the first presentation by Michelle as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it. And, to your last point, is especially in the early stages, PhD student, it's so easy to just forget that you started this with, that you loved, but it just gets, not very fun. But thanks for that reminder. So we'll start our Q&A. So feel free to write your questions there is an option to put your questions, and I can see it here, and then ask the panelists. So while I'm waiting for people to start writing their questions, so I wanted to ask you both about, like, in the early stages when when someone is trying to find out the topic, choose their research questions, it's really difficult to really find something that has a contribution, right? Or if you maybe think it's a theoretical contribution, but it's like, okay, does it really, what do you give your PhD students? What advice do you give your PhDs in that phase when they're trying to find a topic, find their research questions, of how to actually find out if it's a good research question, if it's a major contribution to the literature?
So I can answer the question first, I guess. So my typical advice for any PhD students or junior scholar is that they got to read the literature. So they need to have some sense about, this is what I'm interested in. For example, like a job satisfaction or attitude or OCB or engagement. Then they got to read, they got to really read, carefully the relevant literature. And then they start to see some like a trend in research, right? And then they're gonna see some gap. But when they see the gap, they should not stop there, because as I said, not all unexamined relationships are deserving of empirical examinations and warrant publication. So they got think about why the gap is important and for what. Why addressing that is important and for what, like a practice or like some scholarly conversation or for practice, and and they got think. So when they found some topic that has not been examined but important for theory and practice, then they got to my recommendation, they got to talk about 5 to 10 people who know about the literature, whether this is a good idea or not. So I guess I think this is the most important, I think, process when it comes to dissertation. They got to come up with a good idea, right? Then they can happy with the project, along the way. So I think a well begun is more than half done when it comes to research projects. So I think you got to have a really good, research idea, which many people can buy. Yeah.
So I think this is one of the main difference between quant and qual designs, because I really encourage people not to read the literature up front, but to just spend enough time in the field, or, to piggyback on your suggestion to talk to a few people, to talk to enough people and try to figure out if there's anything there that's puzzling or interesting. we'll have tons of months, years to figure out, what the contribution might be. But starting with like, what's the tension in the field? So trying to, my pitch with organizations is trying not to pitch anything, but just to pitch myself. So I just want to meet to see if we could talk and use any buzzword that, sounds good, like about their culture, for instance, and then listen. And they will guide you to something of interest to them. Hopefully that will be of interest to me or us, and then we'll figure out the contribution from there. So it's very opposite in terms of where we're coming from, I guess.
That's very interesting. Thank you so much. So I have a question here asking, this is from Alberto Meza from Chile. He's asking, I would like ask into about the research design or editors favoring certain types of studies, experiment, longitudinal, etc. Over others, or we could still rely on cross-sectional studies. Is it a risk to use classical surveys?
I see. That's a good question. I think I also got this question from many other students I had in my class. So I think if your research question is really about causality, so if you really want to establish causality, then I guess the obvious choices will be experimentation. You got to conduct a random trial experimentation by using random assignment. But in reality, it's not that easy, especially when you do that among employees, right? How are you going to assign employees to different conditions, such as experimental group and control group? So it's not that easy. So one thing you can consider is that you can consider doing some sort of scenario-based experimentation, like vignette studies, and you're going to combine them with some field survey. So I think using multiple methods will be useful, because even if you use experimentation, some reviewers can say, yeah, I think you establish causality, but your study is not generalizable to real settings, because you did experimentation in a lab setting or in a very controlled setting, so it lacks external validity, right? So there's always trade-off between internal validity and external validity. So to balance that out, I guess you got to use both methods whenever possible, if you have enough resources. And also I think that the difficulty of getting longitudinal data or experimental data, I understand, but using cross-sectional data, especially from the same source, is actually it shows that your study lacks rigor, right? So sometimes it's not a huge problem, right? It's not a methodological problem, but reviewers may say that why you didn't actually collect data in a different way, because when you know that this is not a problematic but not rigorous, right? So I guess my recommendation, whenever possible, try to use more appropriate data, even if it takes more effort and time and money. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So the other question is, do either of you have additional suggestions about managing field projects and gaining access to organizations?
Yeah, Michelle, you have any thoughts on that? Yeah, I think I have done some field study and access some field data. So I think one thing you can do when you are attending a conference, such as SIAB or Academy or other conferences in your field, you may see some practitioners, right? And then you may want to have some conversation with them, right? And then maybe you're going to find that they can help you with data. So when I attended conferences especially SIAB, because SIAB is well attended by practitioners, so I often talk to some practitioners purposely. I'm not just talking them to get the data, but I actually show genuine interest in what they are doing at their companies or at their consulting firms. Then they're going to share more about what they are doing. And then somehow I can see some connection between what they are doing and what I'm doing as a researcher. Then I think it's a kind of, there's a mutual interest in pursuing some joint research project. So that's one thing. And also I think some people may say, you can actually take some companies and try to have conversation. I found that that's usually not working because there's no kind of, the venue for that. So I would say, the conferences are the best places where you can start to, have this kind of connection to help you get field data.
Perfect, thank you. Michelle?
Yeah, so I agree also, like, going to talk to someone about doing a project is usually not very helpful. You ideally would want to have that conversation in the context of something else, or trying, not putting anyone under pressure to have to give you access on the spot, basically. So I'll give maybe two examples. When I'm trying to gain access, because most attempts fail, but I only need one, right? Sending out, multiple emails or letters on a regular basis every month until it hits is a way to go. And usually the request is not about doing a project, but trying to meet to discuss what is happening in their organization to better understand it. So that's kind of my very low bar. Ideally, it would be an informal chat or something like that to see what's happening. And then it means you kind of have a portfolio of contacts. Most will fail to transform into research projects, but you only need one that will transform. And that's all I'm looking for. Also, I've spent time like volunteering to do stuff. My doctoral students know this, but I've sent them to volunteer, in various capacities, sometimes to no use, but I hope they learn something and maybe it will give us a seed of a future project. I've also listened into public events. So recently the Boston subway system and tram has had tons of accidents, and they have regular board meetings where anybody can log in on Zoom. And I've logged in just a few times because I really want to understand like what's happening and what might be able to be done with them. So I'm lurking, and figuring out, is there anything there? So these are like strategies to ultimately gain access, but initially you have no idea.
Awesome. So the next question is directed at you, Michelle. So Michelle mentioned about identifying tensions that emerge from the field interactions. As fresh researchers without much knowledge on extant literature, how can we look for tensions? What appears as tensions to me or the participants in research may not really be one as per extant theories. Can you share some practical approaches qual researchers follow?
Yeah, so great question. Hard answer, I think, but so the tensions to me are tensions in the fields. So tensions for them, like problematic issues. Maybe this has been overly studied, and I go back to Insue's presentation, right? You have to read, but I wouldn't read up front. So I would try to do a lot of work on the tensions and then selectively go to literature to see if people have spoken about that or not. And it's not because someone has that you have to back away. There might be venue to study like boundary conditions or circumstances under which this would not work the same way that what has been described. So again, don't be frightened if you bump into someone who's done the work. Read it very carefully and go then in depth into that type of kind of write-up. So I'm not sure if this is practical enough as a piece of advice, but that's actually how I proceed.
Thank you very much. So So this next question is about mixed method papers. So what are some of the common mistakes that authors make that you see during the review process, or in general? What are your advice?
Can we ask the person to elaborate on that question? I'm not completely sure like how I answer the question. I know it's about mixed methods.
Well, it
So it's
seems to be
related to
very
both, I think,
general.
Michelle and me. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it seems to be very broad in scope. Yeah, maybe they could elaborate. Michelle, do you have anything while we might wait for this person to elaborate, or should we
Someone raised their hand, so maybe it's the person who wants to, but the hand went down. As the person steps forward or maybe clarifies, I will say, you know, when I review mixed methods, I try to write very visibly and clearly in the review. So not just my comments to the editor, but my limitations. So the author knows where my comments are coming from, because I'm not often well equipped to help them on the quant side. And I want to make this clear. And I also warned the editor that in the editorial team, they should seek out, you know, someone who knows the other method, because if not, we might be left with blind spots.
Awesome.
Yeah, one thing I can add is that actually I also know considering doing a mixed method research recently, because I found that that's really fascinating. But oftentimes, especially in micromanagement areas like such as OBHR, when I see some like mixed method papers, there are not that many, by the way. I think the percentage of mixed method papers in OBHR is like I would say less than 5%. Very, very few. And many times I think they combine typical like a field study or like experiments with another like with like a qualitative study, a qualitative method such as interviews and language, I think analysis, something like that. I don't know much about those areas. So I think, my feeling is that you need to have an identity of your paper. Like we can use, I think, a qualitative study as a main study, and then we can add quantitative study or vice versa, right? So I think you need to have a clear understanding why you need mixed methods and why it's going to be useful to address your research question. So I think my answer is also very general, but at the same time, we know that I think relying upon just one method is deficient, right? So obviously, by conducting qualitative study, we can have an in-depth understanding of the research phenomenon. But at the same time, qualitative research methods also have some limitations. That's why we can supplement that with quantitative study or vice versa. So I guess it's really depending upon what kind of research question you have, or like what you really want to achieve using mixed methods.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm actually working on my first mixed method paper. So I'm definitely not an expert, but I'm learning as I go. And what I'm hearing is like, first, I'm doing the mixed method mainly because the phenomenon that I'm looking at is relatively new. There's not much in the literature. So I'm doing like a qualitative study in the beginning and then following it up with like a quantitative to actually test the model that I'm finding in the qualitative piece. But what I'm getting advice on is like mixed method papers are really challenging because you first have to be the bar for the qualitative study is still high. You have to be like the bar is high for both studies, right? So you have to be on both good at doing a good qualitative and a good quantitative. So it's always like a challenge to actually publish one. So yeah, that's yeah. So The next question is, okay, this is for Insu on how to determine whether one is integrating and not combining theories.
Okay, so I think, yeah, it's not easy actually, but I think gave you some example there. For example, like in your research model, you have, let's say, 5 relationships, and you use one theory to explain 3 of them, and you use the other theory to explain 2 of them. It's not integration, right? It's more like, using both theories or combining them. But integration is that when you combine 2, theories that are complementary with each other, you can come up with an overarching theoretical framework. And then you can use the entire theoretical framework to explain all the relationships in your research model, so that people understand why you choose certain variables, and also why you are thinking, why certain variables relate to other variables, and what are the directions of the relationships, something like that. So I think, integration is not just using multiple theories. You are intertwining them, and then you're going to make a kind of a holistic theory, right? So I think you are actually, it's like when you're integrating multiple theories, you are integrating them into overarching theoretical framework. So you're going to come with the holistic research model, research framework, I would say.
Thank you. So this one, I think is directed at Michelle. So is it possible to have primary unit of analyses as well as other 1 or more unit of analyses in one research project? I'm asking about this because my dissertation is focused on enhancing the effectiveness of leadership training programs. My main unit of analysis is the leadership training programs. However, I had to also sought the views of multiple perspectives, including expert training designers, trainees, facilitators, supervisors, and how to enhance the effectiveness of these programs. Will these multiple perspectives also be classified as other unit of analyses?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I actually like to think in quant terms here, but I'm low quant, right? But to me, if your unit of analysis are the training programs, so maybe you observed, I don't know, 10 or 20. You could also think about sessions within training programs. So even if you have 10 or 20 training program, you can subdivide in days because there might be variation, and therefore you up your number of N. So you could go to, who knows, maybe, if it's 7 days, 10 programs, that would be 70 kind of sessions. And then if you have 2 perspectives, designers and trainees, then in each cell, I would want, I don't know, 15, 20 observations. So I'm not thinking of like primary or secondary unit of analysis, but more like how it lays out if you were to present it. And even more if there are demographic variations that are important to your story. Let's imagine male and female. So you have male, female designers, male, female trainees. So that's, 4, right? At least. And then you have the training program. So you would have to have enough observations per cell in order to be able to build your argument. I hope this clarified and this didn't confuse, but basically I like to build like these tables, which I think my colleagues use a lot to kind of figure out how many observations per cell I need.
Thank you. So I think this one's directed at Insu. So for quantitative studies, is it a good idea to design my method at the same time as I develop my research questions and hypotheses? What would be your suggestions?
So whether we're gonna do that at the same time or at different times, something like, yeah, that's the question.
Yes, they are asking if
Okay.
it's okay to design the method at the same time as the research questions.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think usually I think so when you are formulating hypothesis, right? When you wrote hypothesis, think about that. You're gonna say these two variables will be related to positively or negatively, or sometimes you're gonna talk about mediating effects or mothering effects. So you have some sense how you're gonna test those relationships. So obviously, I think when you are working on the hypothesis development section, you got to think about how to design your study as well. But study design is a very broad term. So study design includes data collection, right? And measures and data analysis strategies. So I think the data collection part you can think about later after you formulate your hypothesis, but how you're gonna test those relationships using cross-sectional data or longitudinal data or experimental data. I think or like what kind of measure you're gonna use. I think that kind of thing should be in your mind when you are formulating your hypothesis, even if it's not very, I think, concrete. I think so. I don't know why the participant asked that question, but yeah, you can think about it at the same time. But also, obviously, I think the data collection and other things will happen later after you formulate your hypothesis, especially when you are working on your dissertation, right? So when you are working on your dissertation, you're gonna propose your a research hypothesis or research questions, and then the next step is you're gonna go out and collect data, right? At that point, I think you can also may consider changing part of your research questions, but you are not going to be allowed to change your research hypothesis because it's harking, right? So I guess you need to keep all those things in your mind while you are working on your dissertation. But when it comes to typical research, not typical, but some research project, and sometimes we can have access to some field data. And when you look at the data, you may see some interesting research, questions, and based upon them, you can develop research hypothesis, right? So I think there's no specific order you got to follow. It all depends upon what kind of research or what kind of research phenomenon you are examining, I guess. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you. Michelle, do you have anything to add?
No, sorry.
Sounds good. Thank you. So I think this one says my research setting is a hospital. I have no background in medical or health field, and the learning curve is very steep because of unfamiliar vocabs and organizational culture. Physicians dumb down some things for me sometimes, which I appreciate, and I try to do my homework, but I worry if they leave anything out during the interview. Did you have any similar concern experience during your time in the field? If so, how did you overcome this?
Yeah, so I'll take this one. I actually think it's great that they believe you're dumb and that they're dumbing down their information, because that forces them to kind of explain in details to a novice their kind of practices. So I would play dumb as long as I can. But the longer you'll be in the field, the more you'll know. And if you feel that an interview is going nowhere or the observation is going nowhere because they're kind of playing you because they think you're dumb, then I selectively will say something to just signal, I'm not as naive as you believe. So again, I'll give an example from one of the projects I shared, but in the Commerce of Cadavers project, when I felt in an interview that I was reaching saturation and learning nothing, and they were telling me just what I'd heard before, I would throw in more complicated questions. I'm sorry for the example, but I'll just throw it. So for instance, they always told me that they would preserve the integrity of the body, which is, lingo in the field. But I also learned that sometimes if the body part that they were using was considered too small, they actually didn't preserve it and didn't cremate it at the back end to return to the family. This sounds a bit gruesome, but for instance, if they were doing a dissection of a part of an ear is maybe not part of the body for some. So I'd throw in these questions that really signaled that I knew what they were talking about in minute details, even though they thought I was dumb, when I was getting nowhere in an interview. So, don't be distraught for not knowing. And I'm sure that, within weeks or months, you'll be up to speed and can throw in these kind of curveball questions when needed.
Okay, thank you. So this one specific questions about doing meta-analysis for dissertations. They're asking if you have any general advice.
I think it depends upon your school's policy. So when I was a PhD student at Iowa, they did not allow students to work on meta-analysis as their entire dissertation if they don't have any publication, like existing publication using field or experimental designs. So I think, but even in the case, there's a way you can use meta-analysis as part of your dissertation. So for example, one of my doctoral students, he used a small meta-analysis to actually address one issue in the literature, and it's part of her introduction section. So when she discussed that, yeah, not many studies examine this relationship, she wanted to conduct meta-analysis and shows that there are only 11 studies on the topic, and this is the general findings. And then she also, I think, mentioned that because of this small number of studies have examined this relationship, we need more studies, and also we need to examine something like boundary conditions and mediating processes. So you can use meta-analysis as part of your literature review, because literature review doesn't have to be narrative, right? So it can be meta-analytic as well. So I, as a like a micro HR, OBHR scholar, I usually recommend my students to use meta-analysis as part of their literature review, right? So that way, I think, we can access all available information rather than subjectively choosing some studies in the literature review section.
Thank you. This next question is about journals like JAP and whether they are leaning more toward multiple data collections and analyses as compared to single studies. What's your take on it?
Okay, I guess this question is for me. Yeah, that's a good question. I think obviously, most journals, they like to multiple studies, as you know, because one study cannot address many important research questions. So if your research question is simple, and I think, if you have a single, like a large data set, that's actually maybe enough. But if you are examining multiple relationships and also if you cannot measure all those variables within one setting, then I think, what you can do is that you can test part of your research model or relationships of your interest using one method. And for example, like the direct relationship between X and Y. And then in another study, you can test the mediating processes or moderating processes. So that's also another way you can use, another reason I think why journals prefer multiple studies. But if you can somehow, test all of them in one big data set, then that's fine. But usually I would say, I think nowadays many journals, they prefer multiple studies. As I said, I think multiple studies can do more than a single study usually. So I think that's my answer.
Perfect, thank you. So we don't have any more questions at this point. So if you all want to go ahead and type in your questions if you have any. And I'll ask one. about brand management of your PhD students or junior faculty. What would you recommend them to do, not to do, to just manage their brand, their reputation in the field? What your recommendations are?
It's a big question you're asking, I guess. So, because this is a research method consortium, at least, in terms of methods, so I love mixed method projects. I think they are great, ambitious, and hard to pull off. I do think it's important for you to stand strong on one method and then add others, at least in terms of your positioning or branding on the market. So I always encourage my students to signal, strength in a method and then dexterity in another at best. Honestly, I'm not a good example for that, but I've collaborated with people who are great at other methods. So, so you can at least communicate to the field what to expect. So there's no, mispurchase, if you wish, when you're brought in. People know exactly where you stand, what you'll do, and might have hopes for how you can extend, but at least know where you're coming from.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, I think I generally agree with what Michelle said, but one thing I may want to add is that obviously, when I advise my PhD students, I ask them to read widely and research narrowly. So they got reading widely. So but that doesn't have to be their a brand or their research team. So I think my advice, general advice for my PhD students, that when you become a faculty member, your research should be more thematic and programmatic, so that your name is attached to a few keywords, when it comes to transformational leadership. So we always think about a few scholars' names, right? Their name just pops up in our mind. That's a kind of a best case. So whatever you do, I think you got to have multiple publications on one of your research topics, right? So I think having only one or two publications on a certain topic will not make your name known to other people. So as have 3 or more publications in certain area or on a certain research topic. That way, I think your name will be known, start to be known to other people.
Perfect, thank you.
And in a way, if I could add, rather than a brand, my hope is that you're part of a community that will recognize you, and that will build your position. So I like the idea of being kind of narrow in what you do. That means in the first 2, 3, 4 pages of your papers, you will want to cite the people you want to converse with. And that's, I don't know if it builds a brand, but it definitely builds a community. And by associating you with the 10 or 15 people who do transformational leadership or ethnographies of technology or, healthcare kind of research, by osmosis, you pick up their brand and you're part of the brand, if you wish, but it's not an individual brand. It's really a conversation with others whom you think will enjoy your work. And that's how I would think about it.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And now that we've moved to communities, can you share any advice in terms of networking for junior faculty and PhD students?
So I think one thing you can do whenever you attend a conference, try to attend some sessions and say hello to people you may want to have connection with in the future, because you cannot build a friendship, just by meeting them one time at a conference. So, but you got to build this relationship gradually, right? So when you talk to someone for the first time at a conference, you should not talk about research project, right? Because obviously they will believe that you are approaching them for some instrumental vision. So I think as you know, the relationship building process is based upon the social psychology research. We got to like a move, gradually and at the same, like kind of speed, right? So if you just approach them too quickly, then they will they'll be pushed away, right? Because they will be somewhat, threatened by your kind of, quick proposal to work on a research project together. So try to build relationship gradually and slowly, and you need to understand that it takes time to build relationship and have network with other people, other scholars. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Michelle, do you have anything to add?
So I'm not sure I have a good answer. I think at conference first, I would choose sessions by people rather than topics. And I guess that starts to build a network, because if you're interested in someone's work, then you have something to talk about when you bump into them, right? So maybe you're not talking about your research, but at least you can start to talk about something that you heard or listened to. I don't know of any academic who's not willing to talk about their work in some ways, right? So it's a good stepping stone. And that's how you would start doing this. If you're a bit more advanced, organizing a PDW or symposium is a great excuse to network, if you wish, because you'll have to reach out to people you want to converse with. And even better, getting elected into several AOM divisions. So I know it requires work, but it's also a wonderful opportunity to connect with people all over the world who do sometimes similar stuff than you. And even if they don't, your kind of community can be broad, and it's great to know people all over the place. And last kind of piece of advice, if you have a seminar going in your school, also, driving the seminar, inviting speakers is a wonderful way to kind of reach out to those you want to talk to.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I do not see any more questions come in, so I think if you're all done, I really appreciate both of your time and your willingness to share all your expertise with us today. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day. And I see our participants next week, and have a good rest of your week, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.